everyone's favorite because it's the most often misunderstood and abused concept in biology. Doesn't it sound obvious? It's change over time. What does that mean? What does evolving mean? You guys say that. I have often heard it, and I've heard it in this classroom out of some of you, where you just attribute something to evolution. You're like, oh, it's evolving, and then you to kind of just like throw it out there. It's like the token biology term that applies to everything. You're just like, oh, evolution, and then you move on. And then I usually follow up with, that doesn't mean what you think it means. And I do that to everybody who does it, whether it's you or people I meet out in the world. When they abuse the concept, I say the same thing. That doesn't mean what you think it means.
To change like shape or form?
To change shape or form? So to look different, if you're changing shape or form, would that be look different? Is this whole evolution thing a theory or a hypothesis? This change over time thing. It's a theory. So let's go back to chapter 1 and discuss what it means to be a theory. What is a theory?
It's like a bunch of hypotheses like put together that have been tested and retested over and over again and have been like accepted by the scientific community, but it can still be proven wrong.
So it's some kind of explanation, right? There's some kind of relationship that a theory is going to tell us about, and it's going to be something that's been tested over and over and over and over and over, and there is an overwhelming amount of evidence to support. Notice I said to support. What word did I avoid using? Yeah, I didn't use the word prove, right? I said an overwhelming amount of evidence to support that concept. Lots of evidence, tons of it. This is the moment where some of you are like, she said the E word, and I'm fairly confident she's not allowed to say that word here. Am I allowed to say that word here? Am I about to be escorted out of the building by Father Jim? Yes? Father Jim's going to walk down here and be like, I'm sorry, Mrs. Bloomfield, your services for the past 8 years, I've really appreciated them, but we don't have a place for you here because you said the word evolution. What do you think? I know, I did just say it again. I'm daring him now. I'm tempting him to come over between the 6:30 Mass and the 8:30 Mass to escort me from the building. What do you think? He's going to round the corner now? Yeah. Is this one of those moments? What do you think? Why am I comfortable repeating that word here? I am a scientist, but I'm a Catholic scientist.
Because the theory of evolution is a theory and doesn't mean that God didn't set it in place.
That is actually ideally the best way to say it. It doesn't mean God didn't set it in place. So the reason that we talk about evolution as scientists is to kind of talk about where all of the different species came from, right? It's to offer some kind of explanation for all of the biodiversity that we studied last semester. Everything in taxonomy, everything in ecology. We were trying to explain it. But one thing we can't do, as we look at it, one word that you might use, and we'd borrow this one from Genesis, One word that you might use when trying to explain all of that biodiversity is trying to explain creation, right? Where we all came from, creation. You guys agree that creation is an act, right? Like, creation doesn't just happen. Things don't get created without a creator, right? It involves something doing the creation. So for creation, that implies we have a creator. Sometimes referred to in metaphysical ways as the divine mover. Like, you can't start things without a push, right? Isn't there some physics in there or something like what is that? Is that a physics concept?
Every force tends in the opposite. Something I can't remember.
So essentially, like if I had a ball on the floor, it's going to stay sitting unless another force acts upon it, right? Like that's the basic concept. For everything that we understand to be, there had to be a prime mover. There had to be something to push that ball rolling in order to get it started. So me telling you about all these things so you don't panic and go home and be like, my teacher is leading me on a road to sin. Just so you know, I am not trying to lead you down that road. I wanted to make it abundantly clear. In any of the discussions for the rest of this chapter, I am not telling you that God is not the creator. I am telling you past today I'm really not going to mention him as creator because I can't test it. There is no scientific way to test that existence. And, by the way, in case you haven't heard this before, that whole testing God thing doesn't really work out very well for a lot of people in the Bible, right? Like, I'm going to test you. Throw yourself down off this temple. Who said that?
Wasn't that the snake?
Who took Jesus up there and said, if you in fact are indeed God, throw yourself from the parapet and legions of angels will come and save you? Yeah, Satan says that. Hey, if there's anybody I'm not going to be in cahoots with, I'm going to go with him. Like, it's probably a bad affiliation. I worry about your friend groups, like, a lot when you guys start to hang out with people. I would let you worry about my friend group if I made that choice. Yeah, Carol Ann is pretty shady. You might want to, like, be careful. You can't even say their names without both of them giggling. See? You see what I've done? Ready? They're just going to keep going. Andre's like, what's with these people? So, my friends, I do not deny the existence of our prime mover. I do not deny the existence of a creator who initiated creation. And if any of you are super duper duper concerned about it, you guys look like totally panicked. I can tell. Like this is just weighing heavy on your hearts. There is an encyclical. Latin kids, what's it say? Faith and? Reason. It's John Paul II. So he addresses all of those concerns that you may have there. It's a little heavy, so if you don't make it through the whole encyclical, I don't blame you. I had to restart probably like 10 times before I really pushed my way through it because he's a lot smarter than I was. So I say this because we're going to go through what people used to believe about where all of this biodiversity came from. Where did people believe all this biodiversity came from back in the day? What you guys refer to as the creation story for a very long time was called the theory of special creation. And see, we throw that theory word out there. Hey, that word we defined, we attach it to the front of this theory of special creation. Why did we have to reject this theory? It's not testable. So we did, in fact, have to reject the theory of special creation. Not saying that there's not a creator, but we're saying, hey, I don't know how to test that. There's no way to collect any quantitative data on that one. So the first theory that kind of gave us an explanation for why things around us are as they are is the theory of special creation. Couldn't test it, and then add the fact that the theory of special creation told us that all things appeared on Earth exactly as they are right now. How's that work out for that change over time thing? What do you think? Does it fit with it? Not so well.
Didn't a teacher in like Louisiana get fired and put in jail for teaching against this?
Yes, you are thinking of the Scopes monkey trial, indeed. Yes. I'm not real worried about it though. Like, this is me not panicking. Unless you want to see me thrown in the pokey, in which case, thanks a lot. Thanks. Love you too.
I wouldn't let that happen. Or like let them take Andre.
I thought you were gonna be like, I would pay for your legal defense. No, you just offered up somebody else in my place. Thanks, guys. Thanks.
Miss Bluefield's teaching us stuff. Did you want to take away your knowledge?
You just offered him a reason for making him the sacrificial lamb.
Like Christ.
Wow. That was a lot of love right there. Okay. I don't know how you recover from that.
Because we just did those. And passed the land, so.
It's good. It's a good connection. It's a good understanding of it. Especially why were lambs sacrificed?
Because their blood.
Why do we call them the sacrificial lamb? Can you offer your explanation again?
Because their blood was like the richest, like the best.
And did they have to like? I feel like there's another thing we're missing there on that one. I'll send you to Old Testament.
Jesus was called the Lamb of God.
Was indeed called the Lamb of God. I had lamb shank for dinner last night. Though I'm hoping it actually belonged to a lamb and not Jesus, because that'd be awkward. Though I did go to Mass in the morning, so I mean. I think I just thought myself into a circle. So we did indeed go ahead and reject that because 1, we couldn't test it, 2, there's no quantitative evidence, and 3, the world around us provides us with evidence that that can't be true.
How exactly did science come up with like the Big Bang Theory?
Is that next chapter? We're going to talk about some redshift, some blue shift, the Hubble telescope. It's going to be pretty cool. We'll get there. You'll have an explanation.
I didn't know one of the things you just said.
If you don't believe me that things are changing over time, I will offer you an exceptionally relevant explanation. How many of you got your flu shot this year? Few of you. Are you guys worried about getting the flu?
I already got it.
You already got the flu? Wait, didn't you say you got a flu shot?
Yeah, apparently it's not like that good this year. Or it doesn't-
Not that good.
Yeah, it's like the worst one in a while. It doesn't protect against
That is
year's flu.
absolutely correct. The vaccine that we make, we have to start making the vaccine a year in advance for the flu, right? So they're trying to predict right now what strain of flu is going to make us sick next winter, because it takes us that long to produce enough vaccine to vaccinate the population. If they predict the wrong strain, if change over time happens and causes mutations that are different than the predicted mutations in the DNA virus, then we vaccinate against the wrong strain. That's what happened this year. They vaccinated us against the wrong strain. Now here's the best part. I was watching the news the other day and there's a clinic who's like, oh, this year's flu season's been so bad, we're going to offer free vaccinations to anyone who comes in. A free vaccination with something that we're already aware is useless, all you're trying to do is get rid of your back supply of vaccine that is useless. Because it goes bad, right?
What if the strain next year is the one that they predicted for this year?
The vaccine only lasts for a year. It's not like your measles or your mumps or any of those vaccinations, right? It's only a temporary vaccination. So there's evidence like right now change over time is happening because we've seen it. It's a very relevant change over time, and it's one that's made some of us profusely vomit and feel really awful. Not it.
Would it just make the vaccine like less potent the longer it goes, or would it just not have any effect?
So you mean if we were to save this year's vaccine, it would essentially be not potent. It does expire, and the reason that it expires is because we make it with egg product. So that's why if you've ever read like the disclaimer on getting a flu vaccine, it says specifically, if you are allergic to eggs, do not take this vaccine. It's because we make it with eggs. There are currently scientists in, I do believe it's Japan, who are working on a vaccine method of producing it, mass producing vaccines using silkworms. And it can be done, I think, 500 times faster than it can with eggs. So that would be total benefit, right? Because if we produce the wrong vaccine, then we can quickly course correct with the correct vaccine. But of course, it has to make it through the FDA and all that, and that'll take years, so.
Why don't they just make a vaccine that like works on multiple strains?
Because, see, we don't know enough DNA stuff here yet, but because the flu's a virus, right? And all viruses are made out of nucleic acids. It's the sequence of nucleotides in the nucleic acid that make every flu virus different. That's the same as saying the difference between you and me is a shift in our nucleic acid pattern. And that is the only difference between you and me, is our nucleic acids that we have. We are so different, they couldn't possibly vaccinate against both of us, right? Same with the flu. Good? Okay. So we're all okay with me saying that creation stories should be interpreted figuratively as God is our creator, right? We're not denying a prime mover, we're not denying a creator, but we are saying scientifically we should probably come up with something a little bit. Historically, there is a guy who came up with something in the 1800s. His name is Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, and this should tell you something. Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, you're all like, that's a weird name. Well, he was French, you'll have to forgive him. But that weird name means something. Jean?
Baptists.
John the Baptist. He was named for John the Baptist. Your parents give you a name, it's usually because it means something to them, right? You got your name somehow. I got my name because it was my great-grandmother's middle name. That's where Elizabeth came from. My middle name I got because it was my aunt's name. So your parents choose a name that means something. His parents chose a name with some pretty powerful significance, right? At the time, the prevailing theory of where all life came from was one that kind of matched the significance of his name. And then he's the guy who came out and said, you know, that couldn't possibly, like he's one of the guys who came out and said, that couldn't possibly be true. We recognize that we've seen change over time. There's evidence for change over time. I have this theory, and it's called the theory of acquired characteristics. The theory of acquired characteristics. And what he said in his theory was, well, here's how change over time happens. An organism develops a trait that they pass on to their offspring. Their offspring can pass it on to their offspring. Problem is, it was the 1800s and they didn't really know anything about DNA. They didn't really know anything about heritability, how things get passed from one to another. But here's the evidence he did have. These are the names of two geologists. And what they did was, well, what do geologists do? Study the earth, right? Rocks, earth. In other words, nothing I would ever want to do. Horrible, yeah? I mean, no offense to geologists, or any of you who have a burning desire to become a geologist. If you do, good for you. I'm sure it'll be really interesting. They noticed that Earth was changing. And they came up with this theory called uniformitarianism. I ran out of room. Uniformitarianism says that the things that happen on Earth, that shape Earth, that make Earth, those things that we often term acts of God, those are the things that have always shaped Earth. So in other words, earthquakes, volcanoes, hurricanes, all these things that we would call an act of God are what causes change on Earth. And they said, you know, these acts of God, they actually make changes in Earth that are really, 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 really slow. Very slow. Would you agree Earth is changing slowly? Now here's the problem. When they said this, they came out and said, you know, if these acts of God are what changed Earth, what shaped Earth, what made Earth, what you guys are telling us for the age of Earth is super wrong. And it's because common knowledge at the time said Earth was about 4,000 or 5,000 years old. In fact, there was one scientist, he's a scientist and preacher, who calculated the age of Earth to be about 5,230 years old and predicted the exact date that Earth was made by God. How did he do it? He followed it through the Bible and just took everything the Bible said very, very literally and was like, well, if the Bible is true, then Earth is about 5,230 years old and some change. Hutton and Lyell were like, you know, that's a really, it's a nice idea and everything. But if this uniformitarianism thing is true, Earth is probably actually a few million years old, was what they said. A few million years. This completely blows anything and everything they believed up to that point out of the water. Now, if all of you were like, a few million years is still off by just a titch. You know, a few million, 4.6 billion. What's the difference in 1 0, really? That's how far off Hutton and Lyell were, but they were a lot closer than 5,230, right? You agree? That made them, by the way, wildly unpopular. You don't typically stand up against one of the local preachers and say, this is my theory. But they had evidence for it. They had fossil evidence. They had rocks. They were geologists. They were able to look at patterns in rocks and see something really crazy. If rocks form layer by layer by layer by layer, right? Then they should all be occurring as the same layer. One of them found a set of rocks in Scotland, and he really was Lyell, where there were rocks going this way and then rocks going that way. They were perpendicular to each other. What theory do you think that supports now? You guys know it well. You were taught it in grade school about some shifting stuff. Tectonic plates, right? What do tectonic plates cause? The shifting of it. Earthquakes? So that's where that idea came from. Super helpful. Earth is now really, really old. So Lamarck heard that and he's like, okay, Earth is way older than we thought. And then, do you remember Thomas Malthus? He was the really depressing guy. If you remember Malthus' previous conversations, he looked something like that. Remember him? He was all like, oh, we're going to run out of food. Everybody panic. We're going to run out of food. There's going to be war. There's going to be famine. It's going to be awful. He was right. Agreed? We have war? Agree we have famine? Agree that there are places where they don't have food? Yeah, he's not that far off. So Lamarck said, okay, there's clearly some kind of pressure for survival. We call it a selective pressure. Either you're selected for or you're selected against. You're good at getting food or you're bad at getting food. If you're good at getting food or you're good at winning wars, you've been selected for. Congratulations. If you're now thinking of the Hunger Games in your heads, there are some of you, I can see it. Those of you who aren't good at getting food, those of you who aren't good at getting wars, you're selected against. Lamarck says that's true. There are some things that make you, some characteristics that make you better at survival, some characteristics that make you worse at survival. And then he says, you know what? You can inherit those things, but he doesn't use the word inherit because we don't know anything about heritability. He instead says it can be passed from parent to offspring. How many of you are like, yeah, Lamarck, this acquired characteristics thing, he's on the right track. This sounds vaguely familiar to something I've heard before. Problem is he, one tiny thing where he was just a little bit wrong. You guys know what Schwarzenegger is, right? Bodybuilder, yeah? Okay, you guys know him as the governor of California. Before he was governor of California, he was a movie star. Before he was a movie star, he was an Austrian bodybuilder. And there are, even to this day, particular moves meant for strength building that are named after him because he was that much of a force of bodybuilding. Have you ever seen his kids? His children, do you think that they were born like giant and muscly? Why not?
Because that's not like what he was born with. He like did that by himself.
But he acquired the characteristic,
Yeah,
right?
It's not really something that can be passed. You can't really pass the muscle.
Lamarck's theory suggests that acquired characteristics like muscles should have been passed to Arnold Schwarzenegger's offspring. Now we think about that and we're like, well, that's silly, because we can think of 1,000 counterexamples like tattoos. And if you have parents with tattoos, they're probably actually grateful that tattoos aren't heritable, because you're like, you know what mom and dad chose? Not really what I would choose. Or hair color. I desperately, desperately want to have children who are bright platinum blonde. So if before my husband and I make the commitment to have kids, I go get my hair bleached bright platinum blonde, are my kids going to be little platinum blonde children?
Wait, what is like that? I mean, hang on. What's bright platinum?
Like Marilyn Monroe blonde.
Like, that's pretty much.
Well, that's white.
Yeah.
Like blonde. Like, trying to think of somebody that you guys are familiar with. Like Madonna blonde. Yes, like out of the bottle, right? Will that be an effective way to ensure my children are that blonde? I want my children to be runners. So I should just run a whole awful lot up to the moment that I commit to having a family, and then my children will be runners?
You can get really small treadmills.
Get very small treadmills.
No, just get him one of those baby cart things and always.
Well, I was thinking about getting a leash and just like holding them on the treadmill
no,
when
like one of those
they're very
helpers.
young.
Look at those backpacks.
Except, like one of those walk helpers, you know, like.
So what you're saying is my ability to run is not going to be my children's ability to run? Any of you have parents who have tattoos that you're glad that you don't have? Glad you don't have it? All of those things, Lamarck would say that you would have inherited. That's the theory of acquired characteristics. If an organism acquires a characteristic during its lifetime, it passes it on during, or to its offspring.